the smell hits you first. A joint of beef, the good one, the one saved for months, already roasting in the range before 8 in the morning. You're in a terraced house in a northern town, early 1960s, and every room is doing something. Your mum is on her knees in the front parlour, pinning a veil that belonged to your aunt, and before her your gran. Your dad is in the only suit he owns, the dark one, the one he wears for funerals and christenings, and now this. Your 3 sisters are crammed into the back bedroom because the front room, the good room, the one kept for best, has been given over to the bride. A neighbour 2 doors down is pressing a tablecloth she's lending for the day. The woman across the road has done the trifles. Nobody was asked. Everybody knew. This wasn't a day you bought. It was a day the street built together. And within 20 years, almost none of it would survive. Because in 1962, on a street like this one, a wedding wasn't an event you hired. It was an event you made. There was no wedding industry to speak of. There were no planners, no venues with brochures, no photographers charging by the hour. There was a family, a church, a hall, and a community that had done this 100 times before and knew exactly what to do. Everything that day was made, borrowed, or saved for over many long months, and the saving started early. Money was tight in a way that's hard to picture now. A working man brought home his wage in a brown packet on a Friday, cash, and that packet had to stretch across rent coal, food and shoes for the children, with very little left over. So a wedding was planned the way everything was planned, slowly and carefully, a few shillings at a time. The mother of the bride might have been money buy in the co-op for a year, watching the dividend, the divi, build up so it could be cashed in when the day came. The corner shop let families run a tab on tick, knowing it would be settled when it could be. Nothing about this was extravagant. Everything about it was deliberate. Take the dress. For a great many working-class brides, there was no question of buying a gown from a bridal shop, because such things were for people with money the family didn't have. So the dress was made. An aunt who was handy with a Singer sewing machine would run one up from a pattern bought at Woolworths, the fabric paid off week by week. Or it was borrowed outright from a sister or a cousin or a friend who had married the year before, taken in here, let out there, and worn proudly. Or it came from a mail-order catalogue, a Littlewoods or a Grattan, paid for in weekly instalments by a club organised among neighbours, each woman taking a turn to have the goods first. That old rhyme, something borrowed, something blue, wasn't a charming tradition for these families. The something borrowed was the dress itself, and the borrowing was the point. The ring told the same story. It came from the local jeweller, the one on the high street whose name everyone knew, and it was almost always bought on the never-never, on hire purchase, a small deposit and so much a week until it was paid off. A thin band of gold, nothing showy, the most a young couple could afford and often more. The groom might still be paying for it long after the wedding day, and that was simply how it was done. And then there were the banns. 3 Sundays running, the couple's names were read out in the parish church, a public announcement to the whole congregation that these two intended to marry, and a chance for anyone with a reason to object to speak up. Most people had no thought of objecting. What the banns really did was something else. They told the community. They made it official not just in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of the street, the neighbours, the regulars in the pews. By the time the wedding day arrived, everyone had heard the names read 3 times over. The marriage was already woven into the life of the parish before the bride had so much as put on her veil. Then the day itself arrived and the whole town seemed to know. For most working-class couples, the wedding was at the parish church. The Church of England, the default for the majority, though the detail mattered enormously depending on the family. A Catholic family married in the Catholic Church with a nuptial mass, and the divide between Catholic and Protestant in some towns was a serious thing, capable of causing real trouble within a family if a son or daughter married across it. The chapel-going families, the Methodists and the Baptists, had their own ways, often plainer, often dry, with no drink at the reception at all. But whatever the denomination, the church was where it happened. And the church was free or near enough, which mattered more than anyone said aloud. Getting there was its own small drama. A car was a luxury few families owned in the early 60s, so the bride's transport to the church was borrowed or hired for the occasion. Sometimes a neighbour with a decent motor would clean it up, tie a white ribbon across the bonnet in a V, and drive the bride and her father the short distance with enormous pride. Sometimes it was a proper hired car, a black saloon, the one real expense the family allowed itself. And sometimes, if the church was close, the bride simply walked on her father's arm down the same streets she had walked all her life, in her white dress, while the neighbours came to their doors and windows to watch her go by. There is something in that picture, a girl in white walking past the coal cellars and the washing lines of the only world she had known, that says everything about what this day meant. Outside the church, the street turned out. People who weren't invited to a single sandwich came anyway, to stand at the gate and watch the bride arrive and the couple come out wed. There was confetti thrown in great handfuls, paper that the verger would grumble about sweeping up. And there was the scramble, a custom in many towns, where the groom or the best man would throw a handful of coins into the air for the children waiting outside, who would dive and scrabble in the dirt for pennies and threepenny bits, shrieking with delight. The children weren't guests. They were part of it. Everyone was part of it. Like the high street on a Saturday, nobody had to arrange this. It simply happened because it always happened, because this was a community doing what a community does. Being there was the whole point. And here is where the deeper story begins. Because the reception, the heart of the whole day, wasn't a venue you hired. It was something hands built. Nobody phoned a caterer. They phoned the family. The setting depended on what the family had and what the family could get. The grandest option for an ordinary couple was the church hall or the working men's club, a big room with a stage at one end and a bar, hired for a few pounds for the afternoon and evening. A step down from that was the back room of a pub, the landlord glad of the trade. And for many, the reception was simply held at home, in the front room and the kitchen and the yard, the furniture pushed back against the walls. Every chair in the house and several borrowed from next door pressed into service. Wherever it was held, the work fell on the women of the family and the women of the street, and it was given freely as a gift, the way you gave your time to a wedding because one day they would give their time to yours. The food was a triumph of making much out of little. There were sandwiches, mountains of them, ham and salmon paste and egg, the bread sliced thin and cut into neat triangles. There were sausage rolls, warm from the oven, and pork pies and pickled onions and slices of cold meat. There was trifle in great glass bowls, layers of sponge and tinned fruit and custard, and a little sherry made the day before by the woman across the road who was famous for it. There were jellies for the children, and fairy cakes, and a spread that looked on the trestle tables with their borrowed white cloths, like real abundance, even though every item on it had been counted and costed and stretched as far as it would go. And at the centre of it all stood the cake. A proper wedding cake was a fruit cake, dense and dark, soaked in a little drink and able to keep for months, which was important, because the top tier was traditionally saved for the christening of the first child. It was iced in hard royal icing, white and stiff and decorated by hand or by whoever in the family had the gift for it. The tiers were held apart by little pillars, and here is a small secret of the working class wedding. Sometimes the family couldn't run to a cake of 2 or 3 real tiers. So the bottom tier was real, the cake everyone ate, and above it sat empty cardboard shapes, iced to match, holding up a small real top tier for the christening. From across the room it looked like a grand confection. Up close it was a clever piece of make-do, and nobody minded because everybody understood. To drink there were crates of brown ale and bottles of stout for the men, brought in from the off-licence and stacked in the yard or under the table. There was sherry and port for the women, a sweet drink for a special day, and pop for the children, lemonade and dandelion and burdock, a real treat. The crockery and the glasses were borrowed, a cup and saucer from this house, a plate from that one, all of it to be washed and returned and remembered, so that for years afterwards a woman could look at a particular cup in her cupboard and say that went to our Brenda's wedding. Even the objects carried the memory. Then, The tables were cleared, and the room was given over to the part that people would talk about for the rest of their lives. The music. There was no DJ, no hired band for most. There was a piano in the corner, and somebody in the family or the street who could play it, and that was enough. The evening became a sing-along. The old songs everyone knew, the wartime favourites, the music hall numbers, the sentimental ballads that brought a tear to your nan's eye. And there was the turn. In a working class room, everyone was expected to do their party piece. An uncle would sing, badly and loudly, and to great applause. An aunt would do the one song she always did. A child would be pushed forward to recite something learned at school. There would be a knees up, the women dancing together, the men with their pints, the floor shaking, the laughter loud, the windows steamed up against the dark outside. This was entertainment that cost nothing and was worth everything, made entirely by the people in the room, for the people in the room. To see what this really meant, picture one couple, on one street, on one day. They could have been any of thousands. Call him John, 23, just home from his national service, working now at the works on the edge of town, a steady lad with a steady wage. Call her Margaret, 20, who'd left school at 15 and worked in a shop in the town centre, and who had made her own wedding dress over 6 months of evenings, the pattern from Woolworths, the satin paid off a little each week. They had been courting 2 years, walking out on a Sunday, sitting in the back row of the picture house, and now they were to be married at the parish church, where they had both been christened. Margaret's father, a man not given to soft words, had been quietly putting the divi by in the co-op for over a year, telling no one, so that on the morning of the wedding there was money enough for the car and the hall and the brown ale, and his daughter would want for nothing on her day. Her mother and 3 of the neighbours had made the food between them. The dress was Margaret's own work. The ring John was still paying off at 2 shillings a week. On the morning, the front room of Margaret's house was hers alone, the only time in her life she would have a room to herself, and she dressed in it with her mother and her sisters fussing around her. The hired car came, ribboned and gleaming, and her father, stiff in his collar, walked her out past the neighbours at their gates. At the church, the congregation was thick with faces she had known since birth. The banns had been read. The whole parish had heard their names. Outside afterwards there was confetti and a scramble of coins for the children. And then the walk to the church hall, where the trestle tables groaned and the cake stood with its cardboard tier nobody mentioned, and the piano started up, and John's uncle sang his song, and Margaret's mother cried, and the whole street that had built this day sat down inside it and ate and drank and sang until the light went. It cost the family perhaps £30 or £40 in all, much of it gifts of labour and food that never appeared on any bill. And it was, everyone agreed, a marvellous do. Then came the honeymoon, and even that told you who these people were. There was no thought of going abroad. Abroad was for the rich, or for soldiers, and a passport was a thing most working people had never held. The honeymoon, if there was one at all, was a few days at the seaside. Blackpool for the northern couples, with its tower and its illuminations and its boarding houses. Scarborough or Morecambe or Margate, and Clacton for those nearer London. They would take the train, in their good clothes, with a single suitcase, and stay in a bed and breakfast run by a landlady, with strict rules about when you could come and go, and no funny business under her roof. They would walk the front, eat fish and chips out of paper, sit on the sand if the weather held, and have their photograph taken by a man with a camera on the promenade. 3 or 4 nights, and then home. For some couples even that was beyond reach, and the honeymoon was a single night somewhere, or none at all, straight back to work on the Monday. And home, for the newly married, was rarely a home of their own. The idea of a young couple buying a house was almost unimaginable for most. Instead, they moved in with one set of parents, taking a bedroom in the house Margaret or John had grown up in, sharing the kitchen, the one bathroom if there was one, the outside lavatory if there wasn't. They put their names down on the council house waiting list and waited sometimes for years for a place of their own, a new council house with its own front door and a garden and an indoor toilet, which felt like a palace when it finally came. Or they rented rooms, a 2 up, 2 down, in a terrace much like the one they'd left, with a shared yard and a shared sense of how life was lived. They started married life with almost nothing, a few sticks of furniture, some of it given, some of it bought on the never-never, a bed, a table, a kettle. And the remarkable thing is that nobody thought this was hardship. This was simply how you began. Everybody started this way. There was no shame in it, because there was nothing to compare it to. The whole street had begun exactly the same, so how did it end? How did this entire world, the borrowed dress and the cardboard cake tier, and the piano in the corner and the scramble of coins, quietly disappear? The answer is the same as it was for the high street. It didn't die in a single blow. It was worn away, decision by decision, choice by choice, by forces that no single family could see or stop. The first was simply money. As the 60s wore on and the long post-war boom rolled forward, working people slowly grew more prosperous. Wages rose, the brown wage packet got fatter, and with a little more money came a little more choice, and choice in time was the thing that undid the old way. A family that could afford a hired hall with proper caterers no longer needed the neighbours to make the sandwiches. A bride whose father could buy her a dress from a shop no longer borrowed her sister's. And the moment you could pay for a thing, the reasons to make it together began to fade. Because the borrowing and the making had always been born of necessity, dressed up as tradition. Then came the package holiday, which changed the very idea of what a honeymoon could be. When a flight to Spain became something an ordinary family could just about afford, the bed and breakfast in Blackpool started to look small and grey. Why sit in the rain on Morecambe sands when you could lie in the sun on a beach abroad? The seaside towns that had soaked up the honeymoon trade for generations began their own long decline. The same decline as the high street, for the same reason. Once people could go anywhere, they stopped going to the somewhere on their own doorstep. And then slowly, an industry grew up where there had been none. Businesses worked out that there was money to be made from weddings, and they set about making the wedding into a product to be sold. Hotels offered wedding packages. Caterers and florists and professional photographers turned what families had done for themselves into services with a price tag. The white wedding, the big day, was marketed and sold, and bit by bit the expectations climbed. What had been a community coming together to build a day became a couple and 2 families buying a day from strangers. The hall the neighbours decorated became a function room with a set menu. The piano in the corner became a hired disco. The trifle made the day before by the woman across the road became a dessert chosen from a printed list. Each step was an improvement in its way. Each step was more comfortable, more polished, easier. And each step took a little more of the day out of the hands of the people who loved you and put it into the hands of people who sent an invoice. None of this was a conspiracy. Nobody set out to kill the working-class wedding. It happened the way the high street died, the way so many good things go, quietly, gradually, and then all at once. A family chose the hired hall because it was easier. A bride chose the shop dress because she could. A couple flew to Spain because the sun was warmer. Every choice was reasonable. Every choice was understandable. The sum of all those reasonable choices was the slow disappearance of a whole way of marrying, and with it a whole way that a community had of holding itself together. Walk into an average British wedding today and you will see something beautiful, often, and expensive, almost always. The figures now run to many thousands of pounds, a sum that would have bought the house Margaret and John could only dream of renting. There is the hired venue, the professional photographer, the sit-down meal, the evening band, the open bar, the favours on the tables, the cake that is real all the way up. And there is nothing wrong with any of it. People marry for love now, as they did then, and they celebrate with all the joy they ever did. But something has gone, all the same. The 1960s wedding asked something of you. It asked the aunt to sew, the neighbour to bake, the father to save in secret, the children to scramble in the dirt for pennies, the whole street to come to its doors and watch a girl in white walk by. It asked you to take part. The modern wedding, for all its beauty, asks mostly that you pay and then turn up. The borrowed cup that a woman kept for 30 years and remembered, that went to our Brenda's wedding, has no equivalent now. The day is bought, and beautifully so, but it is no longer built. That cardboard tier under the icing was a small lie everyone agreed to believe, and it held up a real cake at the top, saved for a child not yet born. There is no better picture of what these people were. They made grand things out of almost nothing, together, and they did it without ever once being asked. If you were married in those years, or if your mum and dad were, I would love to know what your day was really like. Tell me in the comments, and if you remember a cardboard tier, or a scramble of coins, or a dress your aunt ran up on a borrowed machine, then you remember a world that was richer than its bank balance ever showed.